102,934 acres, 5% contained. The Sinlahekin Fire in Washington state is now the least contained megafire in America, adding more than 11,000 acres a day for 9 straight days. No other fire its size is anywhere close to that far behind. It is burning in grass that responds to wind almost instantly, and the next 48 hours of forecast are wind. By the end of this report, you'll understand why the containment number everyone trusts is telling you almost nothing, and why this fire is far from over. The National Interagency Fire Center's large fire list yesterday afternoon showed 10 wildfires in the continental United States at or near 100,000 acres. 9 of them carried containment figures between 13 and 95%. The 10th is the reason for this report. The Sinlahekin Fire, burning in the Loomis State Forest north of Tonasket in Okanogan County, Washington, stood at 102,934 acres and 5% containment. Read that list again and the problem jumps out at you. 95, 95, 71, 55, 55, 44, 25, 23, 13, 5. The Sinlahekin is not marginally behind its peer group. It is trailing the next least contained fire in its class, the Tartar Fire in Idaho, by a factor of roughly 2.6. Every other fire that size in America has, at minimum, more than twice as much of its perimeter under control. The Sinlahekin is not the largest fire in the country. 3 Oregon fires are individually bigger. But largest and least controlled are 2 different titles, and the second one matters more right now because the least controlled megafire in America is still growing. It is burning in fuel that responds to wind almost instantly, and the forecast for the next 48 hours is wind. That is the story, and by the end of it, you're going to understand why the one number everyone uses to judge a fire, the containment percentage, is telling the public almost nothing about the fire that should worry them most. The timeline on this fire is short enough to hold in your head. Lightning started the Sinlahekin on July 26th in the Loomis State Forest, not far from the Canadian border. On July 31st, day 5, it stood at roughly 30,200 acres, 0% contained. By August 2nd, it had reached 73,794 acres, still 0. That is a 2.44 times increase in roughly 48 hours. The fire more than doubled while crews were actively working it. By Sunday morning, it was near 85,000 acres, and by yesterday, 102,934, with the first containment of its existence, 5%. Average that out, and the Sinlahekin has added roughly 11,437 acres per day, every day, for 9 consecutive days. For scale, that is an area about the size of a mid-sized city, burned daily, and the average hides the surges. In its most recent single reporting period, the fire added approximately 29,200 acres, about 2.5 times its own daily average, in one jump. Here is a detail that tells you how fast this is moving. The numbers cannot keep up with the fire. Reporting circulating during the same window had the Sinlahekin at 47,000 acres in one account and 74,000 in another, while the authoritative figure yesterday was over 102,000. None of those numbers was wrong. They were snapshots of different hours of a fire, adding tens of thousands of acres between reporting periods. When a fire's official size goes stale before anyone can publish it, that is not a data problem. That is the fire outrunning the system built to describe it, and it gets more uncomfortable from here. Put the 9 days in national context, and the outlier status sharpens. 2 of the fires above the Sinlahekin in acreage were discovered earlier in the summer and now sit at 55 and 25% containment. The Babylon Fire in Utah, at 107,000 acres, is 95% contained. The Aspen Acres Fire in Colorado, 101,000, is at 71. Those fires had weeks to be surrounded. The Sinlahekin compressed a season's worth of growth into 9 days, and the control effort simply has not had the time, or the pause in the weather, to catch it. The mechanism behind those numbers is the fuel. The Sinlahekin's primary carrier is short grass, up to roughly 1 foot tall, and grass changes everything you think you know about wildfire behavior. A timber fire spreads as a function of stored energy, fuel loading, moisture content, the time it takes flames to preheat heavy wood. Cured fine grass has none of that inertia. The fuel is thin, dry, and continuous, and the flame front's rate of spread tracks the wind speed almost directly. Wind at 10 miles per hour, the fire walks. Wind at 30, the fire runs. There's no meaningful gap between the gust arriving and the fire responding. That is how you get the strangest sentence in this whole event. The Sinlahekin added 29,000 acres in a reporting period and was described the next morning as having moderated. Both statements were accurate. A grass fire has no thermal flywheel in either direction. When the wind quits, it calms almost immediately, and when the wind returns, it is running again within minutes. The fire's activity level changes faster than the reporting cycle that describes it, which means every acreage figure you see is a lagging indicator of a fire that lives in the present tense. And keep the central problem in view. This fuel behavior is happening underneath a 5% containment figure. A control line that holds against a grass fire in a 10-mile-per-hour wind can fail outright at 30. And 30 to 35-mile-per-hour gusts are exactly what the fire weather products for this region are describing over the next 2 days. The least contained megafire in America is also the type of fire that punishes low containment the hardest. Think about what that means for the crews on the ground. In timber, fire behavior gives you a planning horizon. You can preposition resources based on how the fuels are expected to burn. In cured grass, fire behavior is downstream of a forecast variable that changes hour to hour. A line that took a day to build can be outflanked in an afternoon, and the safe assumption is that any stretch of open perimeter can become the active front whenever the wind decides. And the number itself deserves a closer look because almost everyone reads it wrong. Containment is probably the most misread number in disaster reporting, so let's define it precisely. Containment is the fraction of a fire's perimeter enclosed by completed control line. A fuel break that the incident management team assesses as likely to hold. That is the entire definition. It is not a measure of how dangerous a fire is, not how big it is, not how fast it is moving, not how close it is to going out. It is reported by the incident management team on the ground, not by a press office, and it answers exactly one question. How much of the edge has a finished line around it that we trust? Once you have that definition, every confusing fact in this story resolves. A fire can sit at 0% containment and not be moving at all. There is one doing exactly that near Spokane right now, and we will get to it. A fire can be 98% contained and have already burned 200,000 acres. And a fire like the Sinlahekin can be at 5% while 1,100 people work it around the clock, because containment is a fraction, and this fire attacks the denominator. Every day the Sinlahekin adds 11,000 acres, it also adds miles of new perimeter. Crews building line at a constant rate can be doing enormous work in absolute terms and still lose ground as a percentage, because the boundary they are trying to enclose keeps getting longer. 5% of this fire's perimeter may represent more completed line than 50% of a small fire's. The resources tell that story. The Sinlahekin is being run by a Type 1 incident management team, the highest complexity tier that exists in the American Incident Command System. 1,099 personnel are assigned. That works out to roughly one person per 94 acres. The suppression bill so far is $9.2 million, which sounds enormous until you divide it out. About $89 per acre, one of the leanest ratios you will find on a major fire, a number that reflects just how far the fire has outrun the effort. And while all of that is true, almost nobody outside Washington has heard this fire's name. The human geography here explains the silence. Okanogan County holds roughly 40 to 42,000 residents spread across a land area larger than the state of Connecticut. Level 3 evacuation orders, the Go Now tier, are in effect for Tonasket, Ellisford, the North and South Pine Creek areas, the Lime Belt, Palmer Mountain, and essentially everything west of the Okanogan River to Aeneas Mountain. Power is knocked out from Tonasket north to the Canadian border. Set those zones against the county's population, and you realize the orders cover a meaningful fraction of everyone who lives there. The fire is spreading toward Palmer Mountain, Rattlesnake Peak, South Pine Creek, and areas west of the river. Air quality alerts are in effect until further notice for 6 Washington counties: Assaulton, Chelan, Douglas, Ferry, Okanogan, and Stevens. And the Sinlahekin is not even alone in its corner of the state. The Modrite fire near Inchelium stands at 50,000 acres and 17%, and the Kaiser Canyon fire, discovered back on July 16th, has reached 136,000 acres at 44%. Even against its own neighbors, the Sinlahekin's 5% is the number that does not fit. So why isn't this the lead story nationally? The answer is structural, and it is worth being honest about. National coverage requires footage. Footage requires cameras. Cameras follow population. A 102,000-acre fire in a county of 40,000 people produces a fraction of the imagery that a small fire in a city produces, and coverage follows the imagery, not the acreage. Nobody decided to ignore Okanogan County. The system that selects which fires you hear about simply is not built to see a place like this. The people under those evacuation orders are just as evacuated as anyone in a metro area. They are simply less visible. And the clearest way to see how upside down the attention economy is right now is to look at the fire in the same state that has all the cameras. Around Spokane, Washington's second largest city, roughly 230,000 people, 3 fires were consolidated over the weekend into a single incident called the Spokane Complex, the Old Trails, Autumn Lane, and Fairview fires. As of Sunday, the complex totaled 8,026 acres against the Sinlahekin's 102,000. That is less than a twelfth the size. Now look at the damage. Approximately 700 structures destroyed. 640 of them, about 91%, lost to the Old Trails fire alone. Roughly 65,000 people evacuated, including a VA medical center. Emergency shelters open across the region, and damage assessment teams still working neighborhood by neighborhood, which means the structure count is expected to rise, not fall. That works out to roughly 1 structure destroyed per 11.5 acres. The signature of fire in the wildland-urban interface, where homes and fuel share the same ground. The Sinlahekin's ratio is the exact inverse, 12 times the acreage, and no meaningful structure count even reported yet. Same state, same weekend. And the 2 fires prove the point at the center of this story. The mechanisms that select which fire gets attention and which fire is dangerous are entirely different machines. The Spokane Complex also hands us a perfect containment lesson. All 3 fires sit at 0% contained, yet the Fairview fire's forward progression has been stopped. Stopped in 0%. If containment measured behavior, that pairing would be a contradiction. It is not. It means no completed line yet exists that command will certify, even though the fire is not currently running. The response has escalated to the state level. Governor Ferguson declared a statewide wildfire emergency and imposed a statewide burn ban on Saturday. Spokane County declared its own emergency, and both Washington and Oregon are now under states of emergency. And while Spokane burned on camera and the Sinlahekin grew off camera, a 3rd fire west of them both did something that should genuinely unsettle anyone who lives near water. On Saturday, August 1st, the Little Giant Fire, a lightning start from July 15th, burning toward the north shore of Lake Chelan, reached the shoreline in high winds and threw an ember more than 2 miles north and east across open water. That ember landed still burning and started new fires on the far shore near Safety Harbor Campground. The physics of long-range spotting are well documented. A firebrand gets lofted in the fire's convection column, releases into the ambient wind field, and survives its flight long enough to land hot. How far it travels depends on the brand's size and density, the height of the plume, the wind speed, and the stability of the air. What makes this case so clean is the surface it crossed. Water. There's no possibility the far shore fire crept there. 2 miles of unambiguous separation crossed anyway. And it is worth noting that open water is aerodynamically smooth compared to forest canopy, which reduces drag on the wind field, and may let a firebrand fly farther than it would over rough terrain. That last point is an inference from the physics, rather than a measured result, but the crossing itself is not in question. Lake Chelan is over a mile wide in places, 50 miles long, one of the busiest summer destinations in Washington, at peak August occupancy. And for planning purposes, it had always been treated as what it appears to be, an absolute fire break. It is not. A lake more than a mile wide is a total barrier to a flame front and no barrier at all to a wind-lofted firebrand riding a convection column. The far shore spot fires added a second lesson. Crews traveled to them by boat and could not safely reach them, stopped not by flames, but by steep, rugged terrain. A fire behavior analyst assessed the combined spot fires at more than 30 acres. On that shoreline, the limiting factor on suppression was geography itself. The response has scaled accordingly. Personnel on the Little Giant surged from 35 to roughly 1,349 in a matter of days, while the fire grew from 31,500 acres on Saturday to 59,346 in the latest reporting, at 0% containment. Evacuation notices now stand on both sides of the lake, and they are tiered exactly the way the region's planning maps assume fire will behave. Level 3, along South Lakeshore Road from Pyramid Creek to 25 Mile Creek. Level 2 from Fields Point through the State Park. Level 1 out to State Route 971. With every campground inside those zones covered, and notices now posted on the Manson side as well, where structure exposure is significant and growing. Those tiers were drawn on the assumption that fire approaches along the ground. On Saturday, this fire arrived by air. One more detail deserves a flag. The Little Giant is burning across a flank that already burned last season. A reburn inside 12 months implies the fuel recovered fast enough to carry fire again within a single growing season, the signature of grass and invasive annuals rather than timber, and consistent with a feedback in which each fire makes the next one easier. That is the same fuel logic driving the Sinlahekin, which is exactly why the lake crossing matters beyond Chelan. It shows the assumptions underneath the region's evacuation maps, failing in the same wind and grass regime the Sinlahekin will face in the next 2 days. Before we get to that forecast, one claim circulating online needs an answer, because it starts from a real number. Yesterday, NASA's Public Fire Detection System, FIRMS, reported 2 active fire hotspots nationally in the preceding 24 hours, with 0 high-intensity fires flagged. 2, on the same day, the National Fire Center listed 10 fires at or above 97,000 acres. The claim being passed around is that if the satellites show almost nothing, the fire coverage must be exaggerated. The premise is real. The conclusion fails on the physics. FIRMS is a thermal anomaly product built from polar orbiting satellite passes, and everything about this week degrades it. Thick smoke attenuates the thermal signal, cloud blocks it outright, and a satellite that only passes overhead a couple of times a day can simply miss a fire's active window. The evacuations, the 700 destroyed structures, and the smoke being measured at ground level across 3 states are all independently verifiable. The detection was incomplete. The fires are not in dispute. And that smoke is its own demonstration of scale. Offshore flow is currently pushing eastern Washington smoke westward over the Cascades. Seattle's forecast office reported smoke mixing down to the surface yesterday morning, with the heaviest expected to reach as far as the Olympic Peninsula, while winds aloft carry smoke from the same fires eastward into Colorado, where Denver's office flagged visibility issues for aviation. 1 source region, 2 directions at once, and 42 statewide air quality alerts active nationally, the second largest alert category in the country. Seattle's own products contain a conflict worth hearing. Heat risk guidance for today and tomorrow says take breaks indoors in cooled buildings, while smoke guidance says seal the windows and run filtration. For a household with neither air conditioning nor a filter, those 2 instructions cannot both be followed. All of it traces back to fires like the Sinlahekin, and the forecast says the engine driving them is about to get more fuel. 13 red flag warnings were in effect across the country yesterday, plus 1 fire weather watch, and the details read like a checklist of everything a grass fire wants. Denver's forecast office issued 2 separate red flag warnings in a single product. One for yesterday, a second running from noon to 7 in the evening today, with west winds gusting 30 to 35 miles per hour, and relative humidity down to 7%, and an impact statement that says it plainly, conditions will be favorable for rapid fire spread. Grand Junction's office warned that any fire that develops will catch and spread quickly. Salt Lake City's products showed humidity bottoming near 5% over the San Rafael swell. Portland's office put it in capital letters, critical fire weather conditions expected, for the western Columbia River Gorge with easterly winds up to 38 miles per hour. And in Montana, the Glasgow office issued a fire weather watch for tomorrow, with northwest winds gusting to 35, humidity near 10%, and one line that matters most, no thunderstorms. That is pure dry wind, with 0 chance of wetting rain attached. The exact configuration that turns an open fire perimeter into a moving one. The heat backdrop is running at the same intensity. 14 extreme heat warnings and 32 heat advisories were active nationally yesterday. Las Vegas's forecast office is calling for highs of 110 to 120 degrees across the Mojave through Friday, with overnight lows that barely drop out of the 90s. Phoenix's office has the Imperial Valley between 107 and 117. Denver's discussion says its stretch of record-breaking heat appears poised to continue through the weekend. Heat at that scale bakes fuel moisture out of grass by the hour, which loops straight back to the fire at the center of this report. Every degree and every gust in this forecast works against a control line that currently surrounds 1/20th of the Sinlahekin's perimeter. Underneath the wind sits the fuel condition that made this season. Per the latest drought monitor, nearly 48% of the contiguous United States is in drought, over 28% in severe drought or worse. The Pacific has swung 1.52 degrees Celsius across 5 overlapping seasons into a strengthening El Niño. None of that ignites a single fire. But it cured the grass early and hard across the interior west. And a fuel bed in that condition converts an ordinary lightning outbreak into a season. Oregon is the proof. Most of its major fires trace to one lightning storm between July 15th and 18th, and 3 weeks later, those same ignitions account for the bulk of 2 million burned acres. For a fire at 5% containment and 1-foot grass, this forecast is the whole ballgame. 3 numbers will tell you where this goes from here. First, the Sinlahekin's containment figure over the next 2 days. If it stays in single digits while the wind arrives, the least contained megafire in America is positioned to make another run, and the growth surges so far have come in exactly these conditions. Second, watch Oregon's statewide total. The state has burned 2,014,481 acres against an all-time single-season record of 2,081,661, set in 2024. The gap is about 67,000 acres, roughly 6 days of growth at the Sinlahekin's own average rate. With weeks of fire season left and individual incidents like the Big Grass Fire still active at 342,000 acres and 25% containment. Barring a change in the weather, that record is likely to fall this month. Third, watch the structure count from Spokane, which assessment teams say will rise as they finish their block-by-block work. The relief valve, when it comes, is a pattern change. Forecasters expect the ridge driving this heat to expand through the weekend before troughing finally moves into the northwest early next week and begins to break it down. Until then, the most important thing you can take from this report is the definition. Containment measures completed control line, nothing more. When you see 5% next to 100, 2,000 acres, that is not a progress bar loading slowly. It is a measurement telling you precisely and honestly that 95% of the largest uncontrolled fire perimeter in America is still open, with dry wind on the way. We will be tracking all of it as it develops.